Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. There was something very odd about the two almost simultaneous grocery store fires in South Pasadena, California in October 1984. For starters, people in South Pasadena could not remember a time when there were two significant fires on the same day. And, maybe not so oddly, both had been lit by a makeshift device that involved a cigarette, matches, and a rubber band. Both also, and here it gets really odd, started in the potato chip aisle. More to the point, they started in the potato chips. Though maybe you can explain that away. After all, potato chips are full of grease and fires need fuel, and grease is particularly good at helping to maintain a fire. The people whose job it was to determine how fires start had no trouble calling both of the fires arson. You know, fires that are purposely set. Then a third fire was called in that day in South Pasadena. Phil Garral fought that fire.
And I was given search and rescue, so I went and opened the door, went into the building. And when I got inside, it was, as you would imagine, hell would be. Everything was just fully engulfed. There's no way that somebody could have been alive in there.
This one was in a big home improvement store which spread quickly and destroyed the store. It was swiftly deemed not intentional, but the result of an electrical fire in the building's attic. That decision, how quick it came and how the evidence was hardly conclusive, really ate at the fire investigator from the nearby town of Glendale. He was certain that fire had been deliberately set. He'd been close by when the call came in and had seen the fire firsthand. As a trained investigator, he took pictures of the fire to share later with those who would try to figure out what happened. John Leonard Orr was a good firefighter, though considered a bit obsessive and overly officious in his 17 years with the Glendale Department. He had made himself a superb arson investigator, if somewhat of a show-off. In fact, around Southern California, he was known for his almost miraculous ability to find the source of a lot of fires in the region, especially brush fires that seemed to almost spontaneously combust during the dry fire season there. That was his job, though, to investigate fires. It made sense he was good at it. The job description was clear. Find the inferno's point of origin and explain to those affected, to police and to insurers and to landowners, how the fire started, why it moved as it did, and if it had help from someone to get going. He seemed to instinctively know where to look, what to ask. He was so good at it that he was often called upon to teach other arson investigators how to do what he did. He wasn't troubled by a lot of fires. Fires happen. Sometimes it's carelessness, sometimes it's wiring or lightning or random sparks from equipment. But there was that one fire that really got under Orr's skin. The one at Ole's Home Center, a building supply store. The one that had been determined to be started by overheated electrical wiring in the store's attic. It had started in the late evening, around 7:30, when the store was near closing. The Deals, a nice older couple with their grandson in tow, were among the few shoppers there. The couple knew they only had 30 minutes to get what they needed for a project, so they decided to divide and conquer, with wife Ada going in one direction and husband Billy going in the other. Ada took her 2.5-year-old grandson Matthew along in the cart. On the way into the store, she promised she would buy him a prize, a mint chocolate chip ice cream cone from the Baskin-Robbins if he was good in the store. A few minutes later, a clerk who was working in hardware saw smoke at the back of the store. It was rising quickly. He was headed for the front when he saw Ada and Matthew. "You've got to leave the cart here," he said. "Take the child and let's go." That fire moved as if possessed, becoming a wall of flame in seconds, spreading black smoke so dense it was difficult to see through. It continued to eat its way outward and upward until it consumed everything in its path. Some people, including grandfather Billy Deal, made it outside, imagining that his wife and grandson had already gotten out. Others had been behind him. A few fire engines screamed toward Ole's. Some were already engaged at a nearby Vaughn's Market fighting that chip fire, and others were still occupied at a fire that had happened earlier at the Albertsons grocery store about 7 miles away. When South Pasadena Fire Chief Gene Murray got to Ole's, police and emergency services were trying to control the chaos outside, even as his firefighters were trying to control the fire inside. Murray saw that arson investigator John Orr was already there.
It would make sense that the arson investigators in the area, as soon as they heard about this fire, would come and take a look, give their advice and check things out.
Murray asked Orr if he'd go over to the Vaughn's and start working that fire because this one was going to take a while to contain. Orr agreed and sped away. Ultimately, 125 firefighters fought the fire at Ole's. By 2 a.m, the fire was out, and 4 people, trapped by the heat and the flames raging inside the warehouse store, had not survived the inferno. Ada and Matthew were among the dead. So were a young mother of 2 and a 17-year-old high schooler who worked hard to help his family put food on the table. A 6-person investigative team was assembled to find out what happened that day. The team was led by Jack Palmer, a veteran of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, who was then joined by Jim Allen, a supervisor from the California State Fire Marshal's Office. The team disagreed about the cause of the fire. Palmer insisted it was a drop-down fire, meaning flaming material overhead had ignited the stuff beneath. Allen thought it started in the aisles. After some exhaustive work, they all agreed they needed a definitive statement about the cause, insurers needed to know, and law enforcement had expressed interest, and Palmer won the day. Orr was enraged. This was no drop-down fire. He'd been at the scene. He had seen the fire move so fast that people couldn't outrun it. He knew in his gut that it had started in the stacks of polyurethane foam, a highly flammable, quick-burning material that was like gasoline when lit. Orr was stunned as well that no law enforcement types had been at the autopsies of the victims. When Orr had taken the time to talk to the coroner, he had said the Ole's fire victims' lungs had a very high concentration of carbon monoxide in them. Orr figured they had been dead before the flames ever got to them. He knew those other big-shot experts were wrong, especially the cop who led the investigation. What an idiot. Cops investigating fires? Don't be ridiculous. Palmer was wrong, and John Orr knew it. Because, just like the potato chip fires, he had said it. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Miracle Made. Your nighttime bedroom temperature has a huge impact on your sleep quality. If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets, which are inspired by NASA and use silver-infused fabrics that are temperature regulating so you can sleep at the perfect temp all night long. But that's not the only neat feature of these sheets. Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning antibacterial bedding that prevent up to 99.7% of bacteria growth and require up to 3 times less laundering. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code COTC at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC and use the code COTC to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/COTC to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. John Orr liked being right. He liked being the hero. He liked that firefighters were the good guys. He had originally thought he wanted to be a cop, but the Los Angeles Police Department said a polite no after he failed their psychological workup. He had also applied to the LA Fire Department, but was found lacking again, having failed both their written and physical exams. Eventually, in 1974, he became a firefighter for Glendale, the lowest-paying fire department in the region. His shifts were 24 hours on, 48 hours off, which gave him time to do what made him happy. He also began to write a novel. It was during the early 1980s that a rash of fires began in and around Los Angeles, especially in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains, those glorious mountains you see every New Year's Day as a backdrop to the Rose Bowl parade and game. And it's true. In January and February, they look green and inviting, but by the fall, Southern California has gone without rain for a while, and it's drier than dry. So, Los Angeles gets about a little more than 14 inches of rain a year. For comparison, Miami gets 62, and Phoenix gets about 8. Which means, I guess, that Los Angeles is just a desert with an ocean view, one that people have generously piped water into. And Mother Nature is not reticent to remind those who live there just who's in charge. You've seen the footage. When the wind is coming out of the Mojave and the kindling in the foothills gets torched, the whole countryside burns with hellish fury. So yeah, fire is taken very seriously there. So much so that a foothill arson task force group was formed in the 1980s to look into a bevy of small but increasingly disturbing brush fires that had been purposely set just north of Los Angeles. Orr was on that task force. He was also privy to the work of a mutual aid group that was working the 4-year string of grocery store fires, something they all agreed to call the potato chip file. In the press, the fire starter was sometimes referred to as the Frito Bandito because corn chips also caught fire pretty fast. In truth, fires were being set in other places in the region too, a lot of them in fabric stores, started by a simple incendiary device usually found among the pillows and the polyfoam. On March 27, 1991, in the city of Lawndale, just south of Los Angeles, a fire broke out at a D&M Yardage, a fabric store.
I'm screaming to the other girl, "There's a fire!" So I run around, I'm going towards the back to get the fire extinguisher, and I get it, and I really don't know how to use it. You read real fast, and you go and try and put this fire out, figuring it's going to go out fast because it's so small, and it just kept burning and burning and burning, and just the more I put the extinguisher on it, the bigger it would get. And you could just see this cloud of smoke just coming over our heads, just billowing out.
That's Evelyn Diaz, who worked at the fabric store that day. I don't think I have to say this, but very little is as scary as a fire. You can't talk it out of anything, you can't frighten it by telling it the firemen are coming, and you can't bribe it into submission. You have to get away from it even as it's gaining on you. And as you're fleeing, you're acutely aware that the bugger doesn't even have to touch you to kill you. All you have to do is breathe in enough of the smoke. In the 1980s, when Orr was setting fires, more than 7,000 people died in fires every year in this country. That number has almost steadily gone down since then. Now it's closer to 3,000. The decrease is likely thanks to the mandating of fire alarms in residences and much stricter weed abatement requirements in the West. It's hard to say how that number is going to change as we deal with more wildfires in almost every region due to climate change. But suffice to say, experts are worried. Of course, not all fires are a climate problem. It's suspected that 1 in 3 fires is purposefully set. The ones set by amateur, insurance payout-seeking homeowners are, of course, pretty easy to spot. But those set by a dedicated arsonist can be difficult to unravel. In 1995, a trained fire investigator spoke about that difficulty to public broadcasting's Nova for an episode entitled The Hunt for a Serial Arsonist.
Typically, arson is more difficult to investigate because the majority of your evidence is destroyed. Fingerprints, devices used to set the fire and such are consumed by the fire, or worse yet, destroyed by the firefighters in trying to put the fire out or overhauling it after the fire has been extinguished. So it makes it much more difficult to begin with. Another facet is an arson investigator typically isn't called to a scene until after the fire is knocked down substantially. And by the time we roll in, witnesses are gone now, the fire's out, there's nothing to look at, and the arsonist is generally gone as well. But the real thrill of it is the pursuit of the suspect himself and identifying him, even when you have very little to go on.
The arson investigator who's speaking there is, fire setter John Orr, a man who loves the sound of his own authority and upon whom the irony of the moment escaped, as he was already being considered the most prolific serial arsonist of the 20th century. Also, he was in jail when he was being interviewed. But his desire to be the smartest man in the room must have been irresistible, as he was happy to show his extensive knowledge of the crime and the criminal behind it.
The standard profile of a serial arsonist is very similar to serial killers. They're loners typically. They have difficult times in relationships, spotty work histories, sometimes have physical disabilities, skin disorders, alcoholics, and almost to a T, every one of these 10 or 12 that I was acquainted with or arrested fit that profile or that mold.
Now you see what law enforcement was dealing with. Someone who was pretty sure he could outsmart them, pretty sure he wouldn't get caught, even when he was. So how'd they catch him? Well, it turns out that arsonist nabbing is a bit like parenting. It took a village. Let's go back to that March 27th, 1991 fire in that Lawndale fabric store. Investigators from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department immediately knew it was arson. They called in the newly formed Los Angeles Arson Task Force, a bunch called together because of the rash of arsons throughout LA County. It included the feds as well, specifically agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, also known as the ATF. Together, they found that 5 other similar fires had been set in relatively close proximity that same day. At one of them, Stotts Floral Supply in Redondo Beach, the task force found an intact and sort of simple incendiary device. A Marlboro cigarette with 3 paper matches attached to it by a rubber band, wrapped in yellow notepaper. It had ignited, but not burned enough to reach its intended fuel. That device was a tricky thing. It allowed a person to light the cigarette, placing it in among, say, potato chip bags or stacks of polyfoam or dry brush, and walk away. The cigarette would burn down and begin the process of setting the foam, say, to explosively burn and spread. If the arsonist was lucky, the device went up in flame just like everything else around it. But this one hadn't. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by iHerb. I'm so happy I found iHerb because I'm cutting a certain ubiquitous e-tail company out of my life, and iHerb not only offers some of the items I used to buy from that unnamed behemoth, but it also does it in a more responsible, trustworthy way with no third-party resellers. This is huge. Products are sourced directly from the brands or authorized distributors. What products, you ask? Why, iHerb offers the best curated selection of wellness products at the best possible value across a variety of categories: supplements, sports nutrition, groceries, and beauty and personal care. The site's easy to navigate too because you can search their 50,000 plus products by category, brand, or ailments you want help with. You can trust their products will arrive in first-rate condition because iHerb orders are shipped from climate-controlled fulfillment centers in the U.S., though, side note, they ship to over 180 countries. You get free shipping in the U.S. on purchases over $30, and they offer 24/7 customer support if you have questions about your order. Our listeners get 22% off their first order when you use code COTC at iHerb.com/shop/COTC. Existing customers receive 15% off. That's 22% off your first order at iHerb.com/shop/COTC. Use promo code COTC. Choose iHerb because wellness matters. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Smalls. As of today, seriously, the day I'm recording this, Sister Betty Lou the cat is a permanent resident of my home. I'm looking at her right now, curled up with Scott on their lazy boy, and pretty soon, when she wakes up, she's gonna have the zoomies. I know the drill. I'm so glad that Smalls is back as a sponsor because if you know this show, you know Betty loves Smalls. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. So convenient. This is why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. Betty definitely prefers Smalls way more than her previous food, which is saying something because she's pretty picky. Plus, Smalls seems to do wonders to her fur. She has some allergies, so anything we can do to help her skin and fur is crucial. So give your cat the gift of great cat food this holiday season. Head to smalls.com/COTC and use promo code COTC at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code COTC for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code COTC for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. The discovery of the still intact incendiary device at the floral supply shop in Redondo Beach marked the beginning of the end for John Orr's years-long crime spree. In almost no time, the new 29-person task force issued a statewide bulletin with the power of the federal government behind it. Posters were made, and this was full court press to gather info. Because of the nature of the specific arson cases they were looking at, they dubbed the suspect the Pillow Pyro, and information poured in. Some of the info that other jurisdictions offered included data on fires that dated back to 1987. Pretty soon, the task force found 13 fires in Los Angeles alone that matched the arsonist's MO. Those fires accounted for $18 million in damage. On April 1st, 1991, the task force heard about a 2-day spree of fires in 1987 situated around Fresno, Tulare, and Bakersfield. Then a report came in about a series of fires that were bunched together around Morro Bay and Atascadero in March of 1989. Again, over just a few days. In each case, an intact incendiary device had been found matching the one that investigators knew to be this arsonist's favorite tool. A fingerprint had been lifted from one of those cigarette match doodads in Fresno. No match was found in the existing fingerprint databases. For some time, Marvin Casey of the Bakersfield Fire Department, a man who had fought some of those fires, had made a horrible realization. He was the first to note that those Central Valley fires occurred at the same time that the January California Conference of Arson Investigators was taking place there. Here's Casey speaking to Forensic Files.
So that just threw up a red flag in my mind, thinking that it could possibly be one of our own setting fires.
Because he had obtained a list of those who attended that conference, he had sort of narrowed the field of possible suspects down. But it was a big list. Now, though, he had that fingerprint. He sent it away.
When I got the paperwork back, they said they couldn't find a match on it. So I said, well, it looks like we're kind of at a dead end here, Either that or the guy had never been in trouble and he didn't have a criminal record to where his prints wouldn't be on file.
A year passed. Then Casey noticed that the Central California coastal region fires in 1989, those in Monterey County, occurred at the same time as the Symposium 4 arson seminar was going on in Pacific Grove. The list of possible suspects got smaller, and Casey started to think he might be onto something. Investigators on those fires had found a similar incendiary device as those used in Bakersfield. They also found another fingerprint. Again, it was run through automated systems at the state and national levels, and it matched no one with a criminal record. But Marv Casey was as sure as he could be now. He pushed his theory hard when the task force contacted him. So sure he was right, he almost beat them over the head with it. They thanked him, borrowed the fingerprint found in Bakersfield, and returned to Los Angeles with little confidence that the print would yield new results. Glenn Lucero, an LA Fire Department arson investigator and task force member, took the print and had it enlarged, made it easier to read by tracing the edges by hand, then reduced it and scanned it to a fingerprint computer terminal. To everyone's surprise, the computer had found a perfect match to a 1971 applicant to the Los Angeles Police Department. It was from the left ring finger of John Leonard Orr. The ATF's Michael Matassa.
I was blown away. Couldn't believe it.
After IDing the arsonist's fingerprint as belonging to firefighter John Orr, investigators figured they might be able to nail him as an arson seminar was planned in San Luis Obispo in just weeks. They attached a tracking device to his vehicle as it left for the seminar. He was observed by those tailing him to have stopped to buy a pack of cigarettes at a convenience store on the way. Funny, Orr was not a smoker. In short order, though, Orr noticed something hanging from below his car. An antenna of some kind, attached to the tracker, had come loose. Instead of panicking, Orr simply removed it, seemingly unconcerned. No fires were set that weekend. In June, the task force contacted the Glendale Fire Marshal and explained their suspicions. They confirmed that in every case of Orr's suspected arsons, his whereabouts were unknown by the department. I learned a lot while researching this episode. I mean, I always do, but this was a lesson I didn't expect. It turns out the arson folks in California tend to meet a lot. Another seminar in San Luis Obispo was set for July 30th, 1991. This time, law enforcement tried tailing Orr. Driving 100 miles per hour down freeways, the tails couldn't keep up with him. They lost him around 2:40 p.m. that first day. At 3:03, a brush fire was spotted just off the freeway along the route he was taking. Orr was observed near the site. Getting every piece of evidence in line and coordinating efforts took some time, but pretty soon, grand jury subpoenas were flying all over Southern California. On December 4th, 1991, the famous fire investigator was arrested in his home, charged with 8 counts of arson. In his briefcase, they found binoculars, packs of cigarettes, matches, yellow-lined notebook paper, and some rubber bands. Police detectives also found a 350-page unpublished novel about a firefighter who was also a serial arsonist who set fires because it sexually aroused him. In the introduction, Orr had written that this was a fact-based work about someone who has been setting fires for 8 years. He had not been identified or apprehended and probably will not in the near future, he wrote. And, as in the real case, the arsonist is a firefighter. In a word, it was a tawdry romance between a man and fire, complete with sex scenes that would embarrass a lot of people, but apparently not John Orr. No one could have missed the alarming similarities between Orr's words put in the mouth of his protagonist, Aaron Stiles, and Orr's own. They also noticed how many of the details of the fires Orr had worked lined up with those in the novel. Protagonist Aaron used the same incendiary device that Orr was suspected of using, and protagonist Aaron had a mighty strong affinity for the flames he caused, masturbating after each one, savoring his conquest. Protagonist Aaron, for what it's worth, was also a rapist and murderer. Orr barely bothered to change the names of the stores that he torched. That is how sure he was that he was not ever going to get caught. He had, in fact, over the years, taunted law enforcement, almost daring them to pick up the clues he was leaving behind. The first time he did that was in 1984, just after the Ole's Home Center fire, the one that was determined to be an accidental fire. How dumb, how wrong were they? He'd show them. A few days after that Ole's fire, a builder's Emporium store in North Hollywood erupted in flame. Its point of origin, the polyfoam section, intentionally set. That prompted a call to reinvestigate Ole's. But by the time the investigators went back to re-examine the Ole's site, the area had been cleared of debris and any evidence that might have been left behind, which Orr must have lamented. Because, as author Joseph Wambach in his book Fire Lover explained, not only did Orr want admiration and glory for his genius hero work in finding the source of fires, but he wanted to prove that cops were dumb, because he had been rejected by the Los Angeles Police Department when he had applied years earlier. Crimes of Centuries is sponsored by Ibotta. grocery bills can really add up, especially this time of year. This Thanksgiving, you don't need to stress about food shopping when you use Ibotta because you can earn cash back on all the things that you were already going to buy. Now, let me tell you about Ibotta. It's a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn hundreds on items from groceries to toys to tech. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. Think of how much extra holiday magic you can make this season with more room in your budget. With Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. This month, Ibotta is giving new users 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. Just add the offers in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. Just shop at your favorite retailers and upload your receipts. Plus, with Ibotta, you can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, or maybe Lowe's, or Macy's, or Sephora, or Best Buy. The options are practically endless. Download the Ibotta app now and use code COTC to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast starting November 1st. Just go to the App Store, Google Play Store, and download the free Ibotta app and use code COTC. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code COTC. John Orr had dropped other hints, pointing to himself as the serial arsonist everyone was pursuing, with none more obvious than in June 1990, when arson investigators were at another symposium in Fresno. This one, Orr sat out. He sent an associate alone instead, as the Glendale Department was facing some budgetary concerns and a possible drawdown on their resources and personnel. And Orr wanted to stop that stupid bureaucracy from taking the fire department for granted. June 26, 1990, dawned hot in the foothills of Southern California. June gloom, that notorious gray overhanging sky so common in the area, a condition caused by the heat of the desert pulling moisture from the Pacific Ocean across the land, had already burned off. It was 80 degrees by 7 a.m. Brush fires were to be expected now. People were thoughtless, and the undergrowth on the hills was like year-old hay, and the Santa Ana wind swirled through the canyons. Around 3:30 that afternoon, when the temperatures were settling in at around 112 degrees in Glendale, calls started coming in about a fire near the 134 freeway. It quickly jumped the freeway and began wreaking havoc in the College Hills subdivision. Sparks flew, landing on roofs and quickly burning through homes. Residents were given minutes to grab their children and go. If you've never been in one of these kinds of swiftly moving infernos, you can't imagine the wrath of God that seems to bear down on every living thing. The heat, the embers, the smoke, the ash, the chaos. One LA newscaster, viewing the scene from the air, said it reminded him of quote-unquote carpet bombing. That day, early on, Orr had been spotted by other firefighters sifting through embers in an open area along the I-34.
The College Hills fire, one of the worst in the state's history, took out 67 homes. Many assumed it was arson, but at the time, that wasn't the main issue.
There was a great deal of controversy in the town concerning their response to the fire, and the administrators appeared to me to focus on that and allow the crack arson investigator to conduct what they believed to be a thorough investigation. As it turned out, that was not the case.
LA County Deputy District Attorney Michael Cabral says there was never a real investigation by Glendale's arson specialist.
The blaze caused $40 million in damage. By the way, the city council never mentioned fire department cutbacks again. The fire had been enough to stop that talk. After Orr's arrest in late 1991, the courts moved swiftly. Appearing in a federal court because he had used interstate highways to transport his devices, Orr was found guilty of 3 counts of arson in the Bakersfield area and received 30 years in prison. He He would be eligible for parole in 2002. The LA task force wasn't done charging him. There was the matter of all those fires across the Southland. Even after he was convicted in Fresno, Orr maintained his innocence throughout. That changed when he was charged in state court. He had no money. His fourth wife had already sold their house and everything she had to defend him in the federal trial. He took a plea deal when it was offered him. He was unlikely to have won anyway. The evidence was both overwhelming and compelling, and prosecutors reasoned he would likely get a concurrent sentence with the federal one he was serving, so the expense of a trial seemed silly. He pleaded guilty to the North Hollywood Builders Emporium fire. Still, there was more work. Orr had set a lot of fires. In 1994, because a statute of limitations problem was lurking, an LA County Assistant District Attorney presented an LA grand jury with 21 new counts of arson. 16 of those were for homes in College Hills. The rest were for setting fires at Ole's, Warner Brothers Studios, and for the Hilldale fire in La Cañada and the St. Augustine fire in Glendale. And, in a surprise to some, he added 4 counts of homicide with special circumstances. Now, it was not about concurrent sentences. The death penalty would be on the table. And there was no hurry. There is no statute of limitations on murder. The largest problem with that was that the Ole's fire was still on the books as being accidental. But this is where the plea agreement bit Orr in the ass. The North Hollywood Builders Emporium fire had been identical to the one at Ole's, except that an incendiary device had been found there. It was also very soon after the Ole's fire, a fire that had forced insurers to pay out $4 million to victims. It started like an Orr fire, it looked like an Orr fire, it quacked like an Orr fire. But it had to be proved, and that meant a lot of work for the task force, a complete reinvestigation of a 10-year-old conflagration, and a reversal on the official cause. But nobody hates a bad cop or bad firefighter more than a clean one, and they got it done. They still needed that one piece of aha gotcha evidence, and it appeared. In reviewing Points of Origin, Orr's literary frolic once again, the author described a thinly veiled version of the Ole's fire. He included one small, throwaway detail. The soon-to-be dead toddler in the novel had been promised a mint chocolate chip cone after a successful shopping trip. The fact that Ada Deal had said that to her grandson before they entered the store had not been noted in any official report nor in any newspaper story. Billy Deal testified he'd never even told anybody that fact. The couple and their grandchild had simply talked about it while just getting out of the car in the parking lot that night, and the ice cream promised had been mint chocolate chip. It was something that John Orr had overheard in the parking lot as he either waited to go in to set up his device or immediately after he had done so. It put him at Ole's. That made him a murderer 4 times over. His own words had hung him. The jury had no problem convicting him of the murders, but split on the death penalty. The judge then gave Orr 4 concurrent sentences of life without parole. He added on 21 years for Orr's work in setting all those fires. I guess arson intrigues me as much as murder does. Maybe it's just that it is, as I said, so scary. And because most of us are afraid of fire, I wonder what makes someone crave it. Simon Whistler of The Casual Criminalist.
John's behavior does not align well with the profile of other arsonists. Arsonists tend to be uneducated, antisocial, unemployed, unmarried, struggle with substance abuse, and suffer from specific other mental disorders. If he's not a typical arsonist, the obvious answer would be that he was a pyromaniac. It's what his defense in the federal case argued, claiming that he was so psychologically compelled to set fires that it was beyond his control. This is possible, but it's harder to say. Pyromania is a rare disorder, so rare that it hasn't actually been quantified. But his book does give us another, even rarer possible explanation: pyrophilia. Oh, is he getting turned on by fires?
It's worth noting that roughly 100 firefighters a year are convicted of arson-related crimes. So Orr, I guess, was not alone in his twisted love for fire, but he took it to an extreme. It is estimated by the ATF that between 1984 and 1991, John Orr set 2,000 fires, or one every day, for 7 years. Their estimates seem to be justified by the fact that brush fires in the area decreased by 90% after he was placed in custody. In many ways, Orr's arrogance got him caught. In the book, Orr repurposed his anger at not having his cleverness acknowledged by his fellow investigators.
Just like with the real events, the allegedly fictional Aaron was outraged at the idea of the fire being not called arson. He loved the attention, and he hated that his work wasn't properly recognized. What about the people he'd murdered? Did Aaron have any thoughts on them? Yes, he did. In the book, John wrote, "The deaths were blotted out of his mind. It wasn't his fault, just stupid people acting as stupid people do."
I'm told that John Orr writes to every journalist who writes about him. I hope that's true. I want to ask him, who's stupid now? Journalist Amy Wilson has always been a little fascinated by arson. Back in the day, she pushed the Accused podcast team to take on an arson case. We didn't get the chance, at least not yet. But hey, for this episode, I let her loose. She read Joseph Wambaugh's Fire Lover, a lot of archived copies of the Los Angeles Times, and the ATF's Federal Investigation Summary document written by LAFD's Glenn Lucero. She also took in a few documentaries that showcased Orr. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Benscoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're at centuriespod, and check out our Crimes of the Centuries podcast Facebook page.